Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today inshallah we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is mannerism. And of course mannerism, we're discussing manners, we're discussing ethics, but of course from a hadith, one of the hadith's perspective. So this is the 20th hadith from the 40 Nawawi hadith, and we're going to discuss it inshallah right now. So the hadith is the 20th hadith. So we already had passed out of the 42 different hadith, we had already passed 20 hadith. And the hadith is narrated عن أبي مسعود. So عن أبي مسعود عقبة ابن عمرو الأنصاري البدري. عقبة ابن عمرو الأنصاري البدري رضي الله عنه قال: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: إن مما أدرك الناس من كلام النبوة الأولى إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. This is the main wording of the hadith. إن مما أدرك الناس من كلام النبوة الأولى إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. رواه البخاري. So this hadith was narrated by البخاري. عن أبي مسعود عقبة ابن عمرو الأنصاري البدري. Now, a number of things to say here. So, al-Badri would generally mean that he was present during the Battle of Badr. Yet, there are actually different opinions on whether this Sahabi, which is Uqba ibn Amr, on whether he did participate in the Battle of Badr or not. And the reason why is because of one hadith where Bukhari himself actually said that he was present during the Battle of Badr, and you had other Sahaba or other scholars that said that he wasn't present at Badr. And the reason why he's called al-Badri is because he used to live in the area of Badr. So his home was in the area of Badr, and that's why he was called al-Badri. Now, regardless, a few notes about Abu Mas'ud al-Badri. Abu Mas'ud al-Badri, he was one of the Sahaba that were from al-Ansar. So al-Ansar are basically the Sahaba that were the residents of Medina. So the other Sahaba were called al-Muhajirin. The Muhajirin Sahaba are the ones that are originally from Mecca but migrated to Medina. Al-Ansar are basically the Sahaba that were originally from Medina. So he is Sahabi from the Sahaba that were from Medina that were present during Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Thaniyah. So Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Thaniyah there's actually a story behind that. Now, the Prophet ﷺ was of course, talking about Islam, engaging in da'wah with those that were coming from from Medina or different parts of Arabian Peninsula that were coming over to Mecca. Now remember, Mecca and Kaaba had over 360 different idols, and those idols were representing or were worshipped by different tribes. So every tribe would worship different gods, and also they would engage in that idolatry within Mecca. So Mecca was pretty much like the heart of that. Now, it is important to mention that Mecca was not the only holy place in the Arabian Peninsula for idolatry. There was also there were also a number of different shrines that were in Yemen and also in different areas. Now, the Prophet ﷺ would invite Islam, would in other words present Islam to the different people in Mecca that were surrounding Mecca, and there was a group of men that were coming from Medina to Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ introduces Islam to them. They right away recognize that this is the same exact description that the Jews were telling them about of a coming prophet. So that's when these two Sahaba, or these two men, they convert to Islam, they become Muslim, and then they tell the other group that was with them. And then they go back to Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ sends a Sahabi. His name is Mus'ab ibn Umair. Mus'ab ibn Umair also is this, although it's really important to mention he was only 16 years old. He was only 16 years old, but he was this main da'iyah. He was this main, along with Ibn Maktoum. He basically sent them off to teach Islam and to tell others about Islam in Medina. And indeed, the following year, the Prophet ﷺ ordered them that they would come back the following year. The following year, he came with some of the most important personnels. Some of the most important personnels from Medina, and some of them were actually the chieftains in Medina. Some of them were the chieftains in Medina, and those were just like Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, for example. They were the ones to pave the way for the Prophet ﷺ to migrate to Medina. Now, amongst those that were present in the second bay'ah, which is the second allegiance in the area of Al-Aqaba, amongst them was Abu Mas'ud al-Badri. And of course, he wasn't called Abu Mas'ud at the time because he was actually amongst the youngest that were present. And Uqba ibn Amr is his name. The first battle that he witnessed with the Prophet ﷺ was the Battle of Uhud, and later he was always present. Now, a very important story that we all remember. So Uqba ibn Amr, the Prophet ﷺ sees Uqba ibn Amr, which is Abu Mas'ud. He sees him hitting and beating severely his slave. So the Prophet ﷺ gets so angry. Now, Uqba ibn Amr is not aware who's watching him. So Uqba ibn Amr is beating his slave severely, and then there is this voice that comes from afar, and it gets closer. It wasn't until the Prophet ﷺ got closer that he was able to distinguish and was able to recognize who it was and what the words were saying. But he said that it sounded like an extremely angry voice. And when he gets closer, he hears him saying, "I'lam Aba Mas'ud, I'lam Aba Mas'ud." No, Abu Mas'ud. No, Abu Mas'ud. He's calling out to his name. So when the Prophet ﷺ gets near, he said, فَأَلْقَيْتُ السَّوْطَ مِنْ يَدِي. I just, out of fear, just dropped the that stick that he was beating with, and it just fell out of his hand. He was so scared. فقال اعلم أبا مسعود أن الله أقدر عليك منك على هذا الغلام. Know, Abu Mas'ud, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more capable, in other words, in taking revenge and retaliating from you than you are on this young boy. So that's when he said, in other words, he made like an oath to himself, لا أضرب مملوكا بعده أبدا, that I'll never beat whatsoever any slave after him. Now, later, Uqba ibn Amr, later he actually stays in Al-Kufa, and there were some differences on the Battle of Siffin and all that, so I'm not going to go in details about that, but generally he then goes back to Medina. So he goes back to Medina and actually stays in Medina and dies at a 60 year of age in the 40th year or 41st or 42nd year Hijrah. Now, to go back to the hadith, of course, the hadith is actually just pretty much the words of the Prophet ﷺ are just this line. That's it. And the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّ مِمَّا أَدْرَكَ النَّاسُ مِنْ كَلَامِ النُّبُوَّةِ الْأُولَى إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِ فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. The hadith goes as follows, that part of the first thing that people, مِمَّا أَدْرَكَ النَّاسِ, the first manners that the people recognized from the early prophets' words. Prophets here, nubuwatil ula, this is talking about in general, the prophets' words in general throughout history, meaning not the prophets with prophets, only one prophet, but this is talking about part of the manners that were maintained and that were revealed throughout history from the very early eras of the times of prophets. إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِ فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ, that if you do not have bashfulness, then fasna' ma shi't. Fasna' ma shi't, then do as you wish. Now, a number of things to say about this hadith. Is this necessarily saying that this is like a somewhat of a threat, or what is it? So that's exactly what we're going to talk about, inshallah, today. Now, in general, إذا لم تستحي, this is talking about the adab, the akhlaq, called al-haya. Al-haya are generally manners. So when we're looking at manners, the most important manner of it is al-haya. I'm going to write it down just so that we could see. The word is al-haya. And al-haya, the Prophet ﷺ actually explained it, that al-haya is actually part of al-iman. Al-haya is actually part of al-iman. And the other hadith is that where the Prophet ﷺ, there's another equivalent hadith to this hadith, is that the Prophet ﷺ actually says in another hadith, when a Sahabi actually asked him, قل لي يا رسول الله. So he's actually قل لي في الإسلام قولا لا أسأل عنه أحدا غيرك. قال قل آمنت بالله ثم استقم. So this is an equivalent hadith to this one, where that Sahabi actually, Sufyan ibn Abdullah, actually tells the Prophet ﷺ, O Prophet of Allah, قل لي في الإسلام, tell me in Islam something that I will not need to ask anybody but you. And he says, قل آمنت بالله ثم استقم. So قل آمنت بالله, آمنت بالله ثم استقم. This is really close to this hadith. آمنت بالله ثم استقم. Say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then استقم. So I'm going to write it again. آمنت بالله ثم means then استقم. ثم استقم. قل آمنت بالله ثم استقم. So this is really equivalent to it, in where the Prophet ﷺ identifies or defines that Islam is very simple. It's all about two different categories. Say amantu billah, say I believe in Allah, thumma istaqim, and then do what is right, which is really equivalent to what a lot of the ayat are saying, defining piety, that it actually involves two sides. It involves the first side, which is aqidah, and then it involves the behavior and the actions themselves. So what you could see here, مما أدرك الناس من كلام النبوة الأولى. Now we go into the topic of mannerism, because when we're talking about mannerism, what and where do we and how do we define manners? Where do we go back to defining manners to? Is it necessarily our own selves? Or is it based on the consequence of an action, or based on our feelings? All these different sides. So one side is that مما إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت, is if you do not have the haya, then do whatever you want. Now when we look at haya, it's actually telling us that haya in itself, because this hadith is directing us to look inside ourselves, and that's why there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك, that leave what you're in doubt in to what you're not in doubt. In other words, to what you're sure of, that this is right. Now when we look at that actually tells us that within our own selves, within our own fitrah, that there is somewhat of a reference or something to go back to in order to help us identify right from wrong. But is that necessarily the case at all times? In other words, do we necessarily go back to our feelings, our guts, our instinct in order to tell us if this is right or wrong? Or is that a helping tool? Well, if that was going to be the only reference, then there would be no reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send prophets and messengers. Why? Because we would see that throughout history, the main thing that led people to deviation, where people were following their ancestors to define right and wrong. In other words, it was called a legacy, at least they portrayed it that way. The other one was based on their own hawa. So how do I differentiate whether something is based on hawa, or is it really based on fitrah, or is it based on skepticism in what my own thought it was based on factual things. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually sent amantu billah, that the main foundation to help you know whether your fitrah, whether your instinct has gone right or not, is by actually going back to wahi. I believe in Allah, meaning that that is your epistemological resource to help you define or distinguish what is part of your own hawa, what is part of your own inclination, and what is your own mind going wrong, in which is dhann or speculation, and what fitrah actually supports it. Now, when we look at all those sides, those are pretty much some inner feelings that can actually go wrong. It's not like you have this measuring tool to see how much of it is fitrah based, or how much of it is hawa based, or how much of it is speculation based. You don't have that tool. So how do I recognize how much of it is really true, or let me say right, or good mannerism? So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ, and say, I believe in Allah. Now, one thing, I believe in Allah, then istaqim, then do the right thing. Based on what? Based on your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the other part is that we do see in the hadith, for example, where the Prophet ﷺ did actually tell one of the Sahaba, and that was the Sahabi Al-Ashaj ibn Qais. So Al-Ashaj ibn Qais, that Sahabi, the Prophet ﷺ actually tells him that you have two manners that Allah and His Messenger love. And when he inquired about them, he said that they were basically gentleness and al-hilm and al-hilm wal-ana. So when we look at al-hilm wal-ana, but then the Sahabi asked, are they things that I disciplined myself into, or are they manners that were created in me? So the Prophet ﷺ says, بَلْ جَبَلَكَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمَا. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them in you. When we look at that hadith, that actually tells us that some of the manners we're able to recognize within our own fitrah. So somebody might say, well, when you look at atheism, for example, is it necessarily, if somebody is an atheist, that they're immoral? Not necessarily, because there are some manners that we actually are born with. We're created with those manners. So regardless of a person's faith, there are certain manners that are in there. But those manners, they can wear off. They can go away with the different environments and with different exposure, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us in numerous ayat that how people, because they actually had diseases in their hearts that affected their في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا, that their hearts had the diseases, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased the disease. And so there is an actual pattern that will affect a person if they engage in that behavior. It becomes a habit, and then finally their heart absorbs it. So when we look at mannerism, yes, some of it is actually part of our fitrah, but that's why when we look at haya, some of it is jibilli. Jibilli means you were created with it, and some haya is muktasab. Muktasab meaning that it is acquired. You teach yourself in it. Not everything is necessarily taught. So some of it you will see one child is shy by his nature. He or she doesn't like talking in public or engaging that. You can indeed teach them how to use or how to maneuver that to go to the right direction, and where not necessarily be extremely shy at all times. But then some of it becomes that needs to be taught. Some of that hayat needs to be taught. How do I actually put it in place? That way it won't be a hayat. How do we understand the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih al-Bukhari actually says, al-haya'u la ya'ti illa bi khair, that hayat only comes with good. So when we look at hayat, there's a fine line between hayat and which is, of course, shyness, and between al-jubun, for example, fear, when a person is extremely a coward, they don't know where to put the. When we're talking about haya is actually putting that shyness. And haya actually involves that you're not doing the wrong thing. Whether you are shy, and this is taking us to the other part. When we're talking about haya, it's actually being shy. It's doing the right behavior, whether it's being shy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that even if no one is present but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're shy to do that wrong behavior. And that's exactly how the Prophet ﷺ actually described Uthman bin Affan, that even the malaika are actually shy from Uthman bin Affan. His iman has gone so strong that even the malaika are shy from Uthman bin Affan. So you're alone, but you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. You don't want to do the wrong behavior even though there's no one there. And there's the hayat from people. So the hayat from people, and the hayat even from your own self. So you don't want to engage in the wrong things. Now when we're talking about people, we're talking about hayat from doing the wrong thing. So when we're looking at hayat doing il-ma'siyah, from doing the wrong thing. Now this is the hayat that you want to preserve. How do I stay away? I'm shy to do this wrong thing. So this is part of what will discipline you to do the right thing, to discipline you. The Prophet ﷺ, fasna' ma shi't. In here you could see it's like, if you're not shy, fasna' ma shi't. Now 3 different interpretations, fasna' ma shi't. The first interpretation is that fasna' ma shi't is a type of a metaphor. It's a type of a word to say that, you know what, if you're not shy, just do whatever you want. And it's a type of a threat. It's like you're threatening somebody. Go ahead and do it, and I'll retaliate. I know how to deal with that. The other explanation is that no, it's actually saying fasna' ma shi't. It's actually telling you, well, if you're not shy to do it, then it should be okay to do. But that is if we are to keep the guidelines of nubuwwah. That is if we are to keep the guidelines, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually put in the guidelines of dealing with mannerism, and dealing with values, and dealing with ethics. How do we understand that? Now, if we're looking at fasna' ma shi't as, well, it's permissible, that means that if we maintained the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in action, and we're not shying in actually putting that in behavior, then everything else should be permissible. Everything else should be permissible. Now, the other meaning is that this is an informative clause. So the informative clause to mean that it's informing you, that just like i'malu ma shi'tum innahu bima ta'maluna basir, it's informing you, do all that you want. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. So here, fasna' ma shi't, it's telling you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. So just keep that in mind. If you keep in mind that whatever you do and you're not shy about it, then keep it in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually watching you. Now, and those are 3 different opinions between scholars on, well, what does it mean, fasna' ma shi't? So 3 different opinions. The first one is that it's giving you a threat, they're threatening you. The second one is that it's telling you that it's permissible. The third one is an informative clause, and telling you that it's an informative clause, meaning that you won't be not considered accountable. You will be watched here. The other part is that al-haya in general is always bringing khair. It's always bringing the shyness. And this is really important how do I actually teach myself? How do I do the therapy of haya? How do I grow haya in myself? It doesn't come from one day. It actually takes lots of training. And when we look at that, we actually remember how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually talked about tazkiyah. The most important khuluq, the most important manner that we teach ourselves is really hayat. It's about abstaining from constant in being one, from being one. So when we're talking about determination and when we're talking about consistency, Mama khalas روح يا mama. When we're talking about consistency, determination in a certain akhlaq, and the longer you abstain from the wrong manner, the more and the longer, and let me say, the deeper it goes within you, the deeper it goes into your heart, and that's when it becomes your own habit in who you are, and that's when you will be shy to do otherwise. You will be shy to do otherwise because your heart itself absorbed mannerism so deeply that you would be shy to do otherwise. And this is the hayat from al-mu'mineen. This is the hayat from al-mu'mineen. And we see that very often in when we see people within the masjid, they're coming in, for example, with their hijab, with their akhlaq, where they'll be making their salat, etc. But when they go in public, when they go probably to an all non-Muslim school or an all non-Muslim environment, they will deal with the environment or deal with the people around them differently because they're not shy from al-mu'mineen that are there. They don't want to be seen as people that are not practicing the deen. And when the mu'mineen are gone or the Muslims are gone, that's when, around non-Muslims, they will engage in different manners. But for a believer, even if the mu'mineen are gone, even if the people around you are not watching you up to that level, for a mu'min, you live and you practice the principle because of al-hayat, regardless of whether the mu'mineen are there, the people are there, your parents are there, your friends are there, whether you are actually around those people or not. In the end, is that for a believer, they're actually practicing the principle. They're practicing the principle because they live up to the principle, and their hayat, the deeper it goes inside their hearts, the stronger and the more consistent and more determined they are to do that akhlaq, to practice in those akhlaq. So when we're looking at al-hayat, we're talking about what hayat? We're talking about al-hayat in doing all the different senses. The hayat to look at the wrong things, the hayat to hear the wrong things, the hayat to say the wrong things, the hayat and the bashfulness to engage in any type of behavior. We're looking at the five senses. So when we're talking about hayat, we're talking about the most important khuluq, the most important manner in Islam. And that's why I'll go back to the hadith, amantu billahi thumma istaqim, that say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then istaqim. What is the word istaqim? I'm gonna go to this hadith right now because amantu billah, because this is actually telling us that mannerism actually starts from the heart. Mannerism starts from the heart. Amantu. The hadith says, Qul amantu. Say, I believe. In other words, part of the manners is what goes on in the heart, what you say, and then finally your own behavior. All those different categories are actually going to define who you are. What you are and who you are, it actually starts from your heart. And then what you say is going to be affecting your behavior. It becomes who you are, what you are. And of course, finally, it actually affects your own iman. If you want to improve your iman, well, what are you doing? What is in your heart? What are you talking about constantly? That's going to be what is going to be defining your iman. What is going to be defining who you are and what you are. Now, when we look at آمنت بالله ثم استقم, when the Prophet ﷺ actually tells him that, it's really important to remember that قل آمنت بالله, say that dhikr, say it your own self, remind yourself of that most important foundation, which is faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's where it starts. And ثم استقم, then istaqim. Now, the alif sin ta in a verb actually means to seek something. Seek, istiqama. Seek, to be righteous. Seek it. Because when you're seeking istiqama, when you're seeking piety, you're actually taking in. You're taking in the action. You're taking in that consistency. You're putting in that determination, and you're reminding yourself constantly to always make the dua to be on the right path. Because remember that asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for thabat, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be steadfast is actually part of reminding yourself that any time your heart can actually flip into a different direction. ثم استقم, in other words, that when we're talking about آمنت بالله ثم استقم, this is actually telling us ثم استقم, that it actually starts with defining the epistemology of mannerism. It actually starts with al-qalb. It actually starts with the ruh to identify mannerism for you. And then ثم استقم, ثم استقم would mean then consider the path, but it always starts from defining what is mannerism, what and where do I go back to define ethics. Who defines it and what defines it is the start. But you can't start with making an action. In other words, start from the essence start from your own life and then let that bring you the essence. It's actually that essence comes before your life. Your behavior does not define haqq or batil and morality, but your own behavior should live up to the principle. Your own behavior should live up to the principle. And this is really important to keep in mind, because it is so easy. It is so easy to slip in different ways. And that's why even if you know what is right and what is wrong, always attending those halaqas and always attending for talab al-ilm is really important to help you. Is really important to help you stay on the right path no matter who you are. Now, when we talk about istaqim, what does it mean to actually do istiqamah? 3 different opinions. The first one, istaqim means to actually get close to what is right. Al-muqaraba. To get close, to get near to doing what is right as much as you can. The second opinion, it actually means completing perfection. So is it perfection, or is it trying to do the utmost, the best, the closest to what you can get to? And of course, the third opinion would actually tell us that it's a combination of both. It's trying to do that perfection, and by putting in لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not hold you accountable for more than what you can handle. Put in the effort. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those that put the effort in the words, in implementing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those that put the effort in doing the right thing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nahdiyannahum subulana. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide them the right path. The more you put effort, the more effort you put, the closer and the closer you get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the more doors the more doors will open up for you in order to find and be committed to living up to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now here we could see that this part, amantu billahi thumma istaqim, it actually reminds us of where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually praised inna alladhina qalu rabbuna Allah thumma istaqamu تتنزل عليهم الملائكة ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا. We remember when we look at that hadith, آمنت بالله ثم استقم, قل آمنت بالله ثم استقم, we would remember that ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised those that would say, my Lord is Almighty, Allah Almighty, ثم استقاموا, that the malaika would come down onto them, telling them that you will not fear, you will not feel the fear or the sorrow. And this is really important because when we're looking at akhlaq, this is one of the doors to getting that mental stability, that psychological stability. Akhlaq is your door to live up to in order to help you open the doors to happiness, open the doors where you are. Here istaqim is actually telling you that your life itself will actually live up to being right, will actually be stable. When you look at thumma istaqim, this is telling you, well, is it a verb? Is it an imperative verb telling you that then act with consistency, based on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is it thumma istaqim, then this is informing you, this is also a way to inform you, then you'll be living a balanced life. In other words, to live a balanced life, it actually starts with what is in your heart. In other words, إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change what is in your heart, or your situation, unless you change what is within your heart. Amantu billah, it starts from there. How are you viewing the world? How are you understanding mannerism? How are you understanding ethics? How are you defining the relationship between you and others? Is it based on taqwa? Or is it based on your own inclinations and your own selfishness? What is it based on? Now here, when we're looking at thumma istaqim, is actually telling us that to live a balanced life, there are a number of categories to work on. Number 1, tawheed. Number 2, piety, salah. Number 3, you always need the dua to keep you on track. You always need the dua to keep you on track, because any minute the heart can actually change everything in your life. Your heart can change. And I've seen this very many times, where the sister was at one point so concerned about wearing niqab and so concerned about, every single bid'ah, and she's bid'ahizing everything and bid'ahizing everybody and accusing everybody of doing such and such bid'ah. And then all of a sudden, just one day, everything flips. Because at many times they're just focused on the outside and forget to focus on the inside. And that is that it actually starts with amantu billah. I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Go back to your heart. Go and ask your heart, what are you up to? What are you doing? Are you maintaining the dhikr? Are you maintaining the dhikr? Are you maintaining your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you maintaining the ikhlas, the sincerity between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you just focusing on the action? And this is really important to mention, because we could see a lot of Muslims confused, and they would say, we see a lot of non-Muslims having better akhlaq than Muslims. Why can't we just say that they are actually better than the Muslimin? This is actually a fitna that a lot are actually living out there, in where they would think, well, they've got better manners than the Muslims. Look at the shoes, and even from the shoes and how they line them up, and how when we say that such a timing is supposed to be something that you should be considerate of, and all that. Where are the mu'mineen's akhlaq? I would say, well, indeed, if you are looking if you're looking for the mu'mineen to be living up to those akhlaq, up to those principles, and you can't find them, you be the mu'min, you be the believer to live the akhlaq and be the role model to show others. Because within the Muslim community, everybody is complaining of others, and everybody is complaining that the Muslim community is not living up to the akhlaq of the Quran. And many are thinking that it's justifying, and that it justifies why it's okay to not be part of the mu'min group. And this is really dangerous to say, because without you realizing, this can actually affect your al-wala wal-bara. Who do you feel a part of? Do you feel that you're a part of the mu'min community, or are you embarrassed to be part of the mu'min community? Well, if you feel that the mu'min community is not living up to the akhlaq, you be the leader that you wish to find. You be the role model that you always had hoped to see. And instead of, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually says, Man qala halaka an-nas fahuwa, there are two narrations, ahlakuhum or ahlakahum. The two narrations mean two different things. The first narration that says, well, whoever says that halaka an-nas, that people are destructed, the first narration, فَهُوَ أَهْلَكُهُمْ, would mean that he is the most destructed out of all of them. The second narration, فَقَدْ أَهْلَكَهُمْ, then that would mean that he's the one that accused them of being destructed, and in other words, he's the one that destructed them in reality. Because then he was just constantly saying that they were just on the end and on the margins of any morality and morals, that he was just constantly just talking about how bad they are, and that's not the best da'wah to actually give anybody. Because if you're going to constantly just lash out and constantly beat people's backs and tell them how distant they are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have definitely made them lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't want people to lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So make sure, don't let people lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and hang on to shaitan. So when you want to do that da'wah, just make sure you bring in that hope in people, but the hope that is also in between hope and fear, khawf and raja. So when we talk about da'wah, it doesn't mean that when somebody says that X or Y is haram, it doesn't mean that, if we are to tell somebody that that's haram, that's some type of policing. Because within Islam, there is al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy an al-munkar, ordering for what is good and forbidding what is evil. That is actually part of Islam. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ actually says in the hadith that if we don't engage in al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy an al-munkar, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would actually replace us. Ordering for what is good. And look at the word ordering for what is good and forbidding what is evil. In other words, ordering people to abstain from evil. In our modern times, this is called being judgmental. And the reason why it's called being judgmental in our modern times is because the connotation, or let me say the etymology, the epistemology, all that actually comes from considering that there is no standard that defines right and wrong, which is postmodernism. Postmodernism regards that everything is relative. In other words, there's no standard, there's no paradigm to go back to define right and wrong. And that's where the word judgmental is commonly and is often an accusation, and an easy accusation to accuse anybody that is ordering for what is right and what is wrong. The word being judgmental and the accusation of not being judgmental is a very foreign word, and is a very foreign accusation from the essence of Islam. Because the essence of Islam is that you're actually supposed to order for what is right and forbid others from doing what is wrong, regardless of whether you practice it or you don't. Even if you practice something wrong, it doesn't mean that you stop others from ordering them to do what is right and abstaining from what is wrong. Now, when we look at, well, isn't that some form of hypocrisy? Indeed, it is a form of hypocrisy. But it doesn't mean that the person would stop engaging in ordering others to do what is right and ordering them to leave what is wrong, because that is another form of a dangerous thing to happen within our society. So what should we do? What we should do is continue ordering others to abstain from wronghood, but at the same time, not be hypocrites and actually engage in what is right ourselves. It would be double the sin if we stopped ordering people to do what is right and we also did the wrong thing. So it would be double the sin. So by making one sin, which is ordering people to do what is right, or forbidding people from doing what is wrong, and even if you don't practice it, that inshallah will come to you and will help you also do what is right down the road. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, كَبُرَ مَقْتًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is such a major sin that you would say and order others to do what needs to be done, yet you don't practice it. In other words, it's a form of a sin. When you say kabura maqtan, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extremely hates it. It is absolutely abhorred. It is absolutely hated from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anybody would order people to do what is right, yet on the other hand, they don't actually do it. But hopefully that is a form that will help them down the road actually do the right thing. Now, there's really a lot to say about this, but if there are any questions, just because of we're actually running out of time, so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions. If not, this is our 20th hadith, and inshallah we'll continue next week. Any questions before we end up leaving this class, inshallah? All right, so no questions. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.